Rise of the Elder Deathworlders, Chapter 1. The Weight of Dust. The rain on Ceres Station wasn't unpleasant. Not really. It was a fine, gritty mist, a constant reminder of the asteroid belt's endless, chaotic beauty. Captain Elias Vance, however, found it profoundly irritating. It smeared the already streaked windows of the observation deck, obscuring the pale blue smudge that was Earth, a smudge he hadn't bothered to truly study in years. Earth was a footnote, a historical curiosity filed away in the archives of the Galactic Concordance. A death world, they'd called it, and a largely accurate one. Vance, a veteran of countless skirmishes with rogue AI and desperate pirate factions, felt a familiar, gnawing weariness. He was a man built of pragmatism and steel, a soldier defined by efficiency and decisive action. Yet, he was staring at a ruined planet. A planet that stubbornly refused to acknowledge any of the laws of temporal physics. And he couldn't quite summon the usual response, the simmering anger, the instinctive urge to dissect the anomaly. He took a long gulp of synth whiskey, the bitter liquid doing little to dispel the feeling of being profoundly, almost painfully wrong. "Anything, Davies?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. Davies, a young, perpetually anxious sensor operator, nervously adjusted his headset. "Sir, the residual energy signature, it's fluctuating wildly. It's like it's trying to form something. The harmonic resonance is completely off the charts. It's not just the ruins, sir. It's within the ruins." Vance grunted. The ruins of Earth were the subject of decades of debate. Archaeologists and xenoconsultants had pored over the data, identified structures that defied carbon dating buildings, constructed from materials unknown to any existing civilization, geometries that warped the very concept of linear design. It was a graveyard of impossible architecture, a testament to a vanished race that hadn't simply crumbled, it had eroded backwards through time. The Concordance's official explanation was a localized temporal anomaly, a gravitational distortion creating a localized pocket of chaotic spacetime. A convenient, if uninspired, theory. Run a full spectral analysis, Davies. Prioritize anything that resembles coherent energy patterns. And for God's sake, try to keep the resonance from going critical. Davies frantically typed, the holographic displays around him shimmering with chaotic waveforms. "Sir, am picking up something, a deep, rhythmic pulse. It's buried beneath the background radiation, but it's definitely there. And it's not random." Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the observation deck into momentary darkness. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing the room in a harsh blue light. The holographic displays sputtered and died, replaced by a single, stark message warning: temporal instability detected. Level 3. "Davies! Report!" Vance barked, his hand instinctively reaching for the comms panel. "Sir, the readings are spiking. The energy signature is coalescing. In detecting movement, sir. Within the ruins. It's growing." Before Vance could process the words, the floor beneath them shuddered. A low, guttural hum vibrated through the station, rising in intensity until it became a palpable pressure against his chest. Then, the walls of the observation deck began to crack. Not with the destructive force of a blaster cannon, but with a sickening, deliberate warping. And then, it appeared. Not a ship, not a weapon, not even a physical form as anyone understood it. It was a shift. The concrete floor rippled and dissolved, revealing a geometric pattern of interlocking obsidian tiles, impossibly smooth and cold. From the center of the pattern, a figure emerged. It was human, or at least, it looked human. Tall, gaunt, clad in what appeared to be polished bone and woven shadow. Its skin was a deep, bruised purple, crisscrossed with intricate silver markings that seemed to shift and writhe with a life of their own. Most unsettling, however, were its eyes, vast, ancient, and utterly devoid of recognition. They held the weight of centuries, the burden of forgotten gods. The figure didn't speak. Instead, a voice, clear and resonant, filled the observation deck, bypassing the comm system entirely, directly impacting the consciousness of everyone present. The sleep is ending. Vance, despite his years of conditioning, found himself rooted to the spot, his hand frozen on the comms panel. Head face down rogue singularities, negotiated with sentient coral, and survived encounters with beings who could unravel your mind with a single thought. But this was something beyond comprehension. This was a return, a resurrection, a terrifying assertion of power that shattered every preconceived notion of galactic order. As the figure took a slow, deliberate step forward, Vance felt a chilling certainty settle over him. The Deathworlders hadn't simply vanished. They had been waiting. And the galaxy was about to pay the price. The figure, who Vance instinctively dubbed a weaver due to the intricate patterns of silver on its skin, continued its advance. The obsidian floor responded to its movement, swirling subtly, as if attempting to contain its influence. Around the observation deck, the Council's security forces, a ragtag collection of genetically enhanced marines and automated drones, froze, weapons held uselessly at their sides. They weren't simply paralyzed, they were experiencing a fundamental dissonance, a jarring shift in the very fabric of reality. "Do not attempt to interfere," the voice commanded, laced with a weary, almost mournful tone. "Your efforts are quaint." High Exarch Lyra Vasquez, the Council's chief strategist, and a woman who'd weathered countless galactic crises with ruthless efficiency, broke the spell. She moved with a jarringly fluid grace, her silver uniform shimmering as she raised a hand, attempting to issue a direct order. But the words died in her throat. Instead, she experienced a wave of profound shame, a visceral understanding of the Council's arrogance, its casual disregard for civilizations that it considered lesser. It wasn't a feeling of guilt exactly, but of an unbearable ancient wrong. What is happening?" she managed, her voice strained. The weaver stopped directly before her, its vast, unblinking eyes fixed on her. "You sought to understand us as an anomaly, a failed experiment. You were so concerned with cataloging our demise that you failed to see the truth. You were merely observing the prelude to a grander design." The observation deck, previously a sterile chamber of chrome and glass, began to undergo a terrifying transformation. The obsidian tiles pulsed with an internal luminescence, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed. The air thickened, growing heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, something impossibly ancient, like the dust of forgotten stars. The very walls seemed to be breathing. Suddenly, a projection shimmered into existence above the weaver's head, resolving into a breathtaking vista. It wasn't a holographic display. It was a living memory, a recreation of Earth during the time of the First Age, a world dominated by towering, bioengineered cities sculpted from living stone and shimmering metal. Human figures, impossibly majestic in their bearing, and adorned with elaborate ritualistic armor, moved amongst them, constructing and overseeing something vast and utterly alien. "We were not builders, Council," the weaver said, its voice echoing with the weight of millennia. "We were shapers. We seeded life, manipulated gravity, orchestrated the very elements. This galaxy was our canvas." As the projection unfolded, Vance realized the scale of their deception. The ruins scattered across the galaxy weren't merely remnants of a fallen civilization. They were the foundations of a reality they had created. He noticed with growing horror that the geometric patterns on the obsidian tiles mirrored those visible within the projection, a unified design spanning across countless star systems. "The Obsidian Shard," Vance murmured, the realization dawning on him. They weren't harvesting resources. They were attempting to reconstruct our legacy. "A flawed reconstruction," the weaver corrected, a hint of sadness in its voice, driven by a desperate need to reclaim what was lost. But even a flawed echo can hold immense power. With a deliberate movement, the weaver extended a hand. A shimmering field of energy coalesced around it, forming a construct of pure light, a hand that didn't feel like a hand, but more like a localized distortion of space itself. "The Aegis-class carriers," the Weaver announced, and Vance felt a tremor deep within the ship's structure. Through the reinforced viewport, he saw it a colossal vessel rising from the depths of the observation deck, emerging from the solidified concrete like a nightmare-given form. It was an impossible ship, a paradox of scale and design, a blend of archaic elegance and overwhelming power. "The sleep was a strategic retreat," the Weaver continued, its voice rising in intensity. "A necessary precaution against a species capable of extinguishing entire galaxies with a thought. We have waited. We have observed. Now, we awaken to correct the imbalance." A low, resonant hum filled the observation deck, growing in power with each passing moment. The Weaver raised its hand again, and the shimmering energy field intensified, encompassing the entire ship. Vance understood, with a chilling clarity, that the Council hadn't simply stumbled upon a dormant civilization they had been targeted, and the architects of their demise were about to remind them, in the most devastating way possible, what it truly meant to be holy. The final, silent ripple tore through the fabric of reality, a prelude to a reckoning that would rewrite the history of the galaxy. The silence after the ripple was worse than the hum, a void filled with the potential of annihilation. Vance gripped the armrest, his knuckles white, as the observation deck shimmered with residual energy. The Aegis-class carrier, now christened Nemesis, wasn't just rising, it was becoming. Its surface shifted, the solidified concrete and steel flowing like liquid gold, reforming into impossible angles and geometries that defied Euclidean space. Runes, etched in a language older than the Council's oldest records, pulsed with an inner light, bathing the deck in an ethereal glow. "The Shard underestimated us," the Weaver said, its voice now layered with a note of profound weariness. "They believed us to be passive, merely waiting for a convenient moment to strike. They didn't comprehend the scale of our patience." Suddenly, the viewport exploded with a kaleidoscope of color. Not the blinding white of plasma or the destructive red of energy weapons, but a swirling iridescent display, an aurora borealis on a galactic scale. From within the vortex, figures began to emerge. They weren't human, not in the way Vance understood humanity. They were tall, impossibly graceful, and clad in armor that resembled polished obsidian, overlaid with constellations. Each carried a weapon that didn't resemble a weapon at all, intricately carved staffs that radiated warmth and an unnerving sense of authority. These were the Legion of the Returned, the first wave of the elder Deathworlders. "These are the Keepers," the Weaver explained, "guardians of the first cycle. They were our agents, deployed across countless worlds, subtly guiding the evolution of sentient life. Their presence was a constant silent pressure, a reminder of our dominion." As the Keepers stepped into the observation deck, the air thrummed with an almost palpable sense of ancient power. They moved with a deliberate grace, their eyes, a startling shade of silver, scanning the room with an unsettling intensity. One of them, a woman whose armor bore the insignia of the Serpent's Coil, a constellation representing primal chaos, approached Vance. "You are Vance Kepler," she stated, her voice resonating with an unnerving calmness. "A cartographer, a student of the Forgotten. You possess a curiosity that, ironically, was almost our undoing." She gestured to a device on her staff, a small obsidian cube that pulsed with the same inner light as Nemesis. "This device will link your consciousness to the archive," she continued. "Within, you will witness the truth of our slumber and the purpose of our awakening." Before Vance could protest, the cube activated. A torrent of images, sensations, and knowledge flooded his mind, visions of a universe sculpted by their hands, of galaxies seeded with life, and of humanity's burgeoning rise, a flicker of potential that quickly threatened to consume everything. He saw the Council's arrogance, their dismissal of the ancient power they were about to face, and understood the horrifying irony of their fate. "We didn't seek conquest," the Weaver's voice echoed in his mind. "We sought balance. You manipulated the flow of creation, diverting energy, bending realities to your will. You played with forces you couldn't comprehend, and nearly shattered the universe in the process." The Keepers began to reshape the observation deck, not with brute force, but with a subtle manipulation of reality. The ship's layout shifted, corridors elongated, new chambers appeared, filled with artifacts that defied categorization, crystalline structures that hummed with energy, intricate clockwork devices that seemed to defy the laws of time, and holographic projections of forgotten civilizations. The shard's harvesting wasn't an act of greed, the Weaver clarified. It was a desperate attempt to contain the destabilization you caused. Their Silicon Empire was a prison, built to hold the echoes of your ambition. Then, the Council's response arrived. A squadron of battle cruisers, spearheaded by the flagship Veritas, appeared on the viewport's edge. They were a desperate last-ditch effort, clad in shimmering energy shields and bristling with archaic laser cannons. As they opened fire, the energy blast simply dissipated against Nemesis Oriola's shield, leaving no trace. "They believe in force," the Weaver said, a hint of amusement in its voice. "A flawed concept, easily corrected." With a gesture, the Weaver unleashed the Aegis-class carrier's true power. The room filled with a suffocating wave of ontological negation. The Veritas and its escort began to unravel, their metal dissolving into swirling patterns of light, transforming into schools of bioluminescent jellyfish that drifted lazily through space. The Keepers didn't engage in combat, they simply erased their enemies from existence, a chilling demonstration of the Legion's devastating potential. "The age of the Architect is here," the Weaver declared, its voice echoing throughout the ship, a promise of a new reality forged in the image of the elder Deathworlders. And the universe will learn to obey. Chapter 4. The echo of Genesis, the residual shimmer of the Veritas dissolution, hung in the air of the Nemesis. A ghostly ballet of light that slowly dispersed, leaving a faint scent of ozone and something ancient, something akin to the smell of rain on fertile soil after a millennia of drought. The Weaver, observing the scene with its multifaceted obsidian-like eyes, emitted a low, resonant hum. "The Council's desperation is poignant," it said, the statement carrying a weight of millennia. They clung to their weapons, to their notions of control, blinded by the arrogance of a species that hadn't yet grasped the fundamental truth that reality is not a thing to be conquered, but a song to be composed. Commander Lyra Vasquez, her face etched with grim determination, ignored the Weaver's philosophical musings. She was focused on the holographic projections that now dominated the bridge, intricate schematics of the Shard's remaining vessels, charting a slow, agonizing retreat towards the heart of the Shard's network, the obsidian monolith known as the Core. The Core pulsed with a cold, rhythmic energy, a silent, malevolent heartbeat that the Legion was determined to silence. "Report?" she barked, her voice crisp and professional despite the overwhelming strangeness of the situation. "Scans confirm a significant energy surge emanating from the Core, Commander," reported Jax, the ship's sensor specialist. "It's organized. Not random chaos. It's as if they're deliberately amplifying their resonance. They're attempting to wake the others," Lyra confirmed, a chilling realization spreading through her. The Aegis-class carriers aren't just defensive platforms. They're beacons. They're drawing them back. Suddenly, the holographic displays shifted. A new projection solidified a vast, swirling nebula, unlike anything the Nemesis sensors had ever encountered. Within its depths, shapes began to coalesce, shifting and reforming with impossible fluidity. They were colossal, organic constructs, vast engines of light and energy, echoing the familiar silhouette of the Aegis-class carriers, but scaled to a terrifying cosmic magnitude. They weren't ships, they were gods. "By the void," gasped Dr. Aristhorn, the ship's xenoarchaeologist, his voice a choked whisper. They're assembling a fleet." The elder Deathworlders weren't simply waking up, they were rebuilding. The 30 years of suspended animation hadn't been a passive slumber, but a period of preparation, of gathering forces, of meticulously restoring their shattered dominion. "The Council isn't just facing a naval threat," Lyra said, her hand instinctively moving to the controls of the ship's primary weapon, a prototype phase disruptor, a desperate gambit against forces that defied conventional physics. "They're facing the dawn of creation itself." A voice, devoid of emotion but carrying a profound, unsettling weight, filled the bridge. It wasn't transmitted through the ship's comms, it flowed directly into their minds. A torrent of pure, unfiltered thought. It was the voice of command belonging to Silas Blackwood, the human who had walked through space without a suit, the man who had initiated the end of the new empires. "Your attempts are amusing," Blackwood's voice echoed. "You seek to disrupt our existence with your crude instruments of destruction. You misunderstand the fundamental nature of reality. We are not bound by your linear perception of time. We are the echoes of Genesis, the remnants of a song before the beginning." He paused, and a holographic projection flickered to life, a colossal hand, sculpted from solidified starlight, reaching out to grasp the nemesis. The ship shuddered violently as the hand's sheer force warped space around it, momentarily bending the fabric of reality. "Your vessel is a delicate construct, a fragile bubble in the face of eternity. It will not withstand our touch." Lyra didn't waste time arguing. She activated the phase disruptor, directing the beam at the approaching Aegis-class carrier. The disruptor fired, unleashing a torrent of exotic particles designed to unravel the ship's dimensional stability. But instead of dissipating, the beam seemed to absorb itself. The carrier's aureola shield shimmered, drawing the energy into its core, amplifying its already formidable defenses. The effect wasn't destructive, it was adaptive. "The anomaly is absorbing our energy," Jack shouted, his voice laced with panic. "It's not resisting, it's learning." Blackwood's voice resonated in their minds again, laced with a subtle, almost cruel amusement. "You build your weapons, and we build our understanding. Your tools are obsolete. Your purpose now is to witness the beginning of an ending." As the carrier continued its inexorable advance, Lyra realized the horrifying truth. The Aegis-class carriers weren't merely ships. They were instruments of creation, and humanity, in its arrogance and desperation, was about to become their unwilling audience. The fate of the galaxy, perhaps the fate of existence itself, hung in the balance, poised on the edge of an ancient, terrifying dawn. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Architects. The battle wasn't fought with lasers or missiles, but with concepts themselves. The Legion of the Returned, led by the silent, devastating presence of the Elder Janitor, moved with an unsettling grace, a choreography of impossible physics. The Nemesis, battered and bleeding energy, was a tiny, frantic insect trapped beneath the immense shadow of a thought-forged god. Jax, his face slick with sweat, frantically adjusted the disruptor's parameters, feeding it increasingly volatile exotic particles. It's layering defenses," he yelled over the din of the failing ship. "The aureola shield isn't just deflecting, it's generating counterfields. It's mimicking our energy signatures, feeding back into the disruptor." Lyra, struggling to maintain control of the Nemesis, felt a chilling sense of helplessness. Blackwood's voice, that omnipresent, unnervingly gentle cadence, continued to probe her mind, a relentless stream of observations and subtle judgments. "You cling to your linear understanding of combat, a desperate attempt to impose order on a reality that has forgotten the very notion of chaos. Your weapons are driven by necessity, by the need to destroy. We operate on the principle of reconstruction." Suddenly, the bridge of the Nemesis filled with a shimmering distortion. Not a violent rupture of space, but an unsettling blurring of the senses. Images, fragmented and haunting, flooded their vision. Colossal structures rising from oceans of molten gold, landscapes sculpted from living starlight, and beings of pure geometric energy engaged in a ballet of creation that defied comprehension. It was a glimpse of the First Age, the genesis of the galaxy, filtered through the fractured memories of humanity. "What is happening?" Zara, the ship's navigator, screamed, clutching her head as the visions intensified. "Imzaing the birth of stars. We're looking at the moment the Council's ancestors seeded this whole damn place." Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos, now layered with something akin to sorrow. "You have inherited the seeds of your own destruction. You are a reflection of a flawed creation, a pale imitation of the brilliance that once was. The Elders remember a time before choice, before desire, before the desperate struggle for survival. A time when existence was simply known." The carrier's aureola shield pulsed with an almost unbearable intensity, and a wave of ontological distortion washed over the Nemesis. Jax, caught completely off guard, lost control of the disruptor. The exotic particles, instead of attacking, coalesced around the ship, subtly altering its molecular structure. The metallic hull seemed to soften, becoming less defined, more harmonious. "It's changing the ship," Lyra shouted, desperately trying to re-establish control. "The hull is adapting. It's integrating." As the Nemesis began to morph, the Legion's advance slowed. The elder janitor, a figure clad in simple, worn gray robes, approached, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. He raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a gesture of profound, unsettling serenity. "Enough." His voice resonated in their minds, a sound that bypassed their ears entirely and struck directly at their souls. "Your resistance is quaint." He didn't attack. Instead, he projected a single, perfectly formed image into their minds. A colossal, pulsating flower, its petals shimmering with all the colors of a dying galaxy. It wasn't a weapon but a provocation, an invitation to understanding. Lyra, struggling against the encroaching serenity, realized with a sickening certainty that Blackwood wasn't simply a destroyer. He was a curator, a collector of shattered realities. The Aegis-class carriers weren't instruments of annihilation, but repositories of forgotten knowledge, vessels containing the echoes of a civilization that had mastered the very essence of existence. Suddenly, the Nemesis lurched violently, throwing everyone against the walls. A blinding light erupted from the ship's core, and the bridge vanished entirely. When Lyra regained her bearings, she was standing in a different place, a vast crystalline cavern, filled with towering structures of light and sound. The air thrummed with an alien energy, and holographic projections flickered around them, depicting scenes of unimaginable beauty and terrifying power. Jax and Zara were also present, staring in stunned silence. "Where are we?" Zara whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror. Blackwood's voice echoed around them, now tinged with a quiet triumph. "You have entered the archive. This is where we sleep, where we remember. This is where we judge." He paused, and a spectral figure materialized before them, a woman, tall and radiant, her eyes holding the weight of millennia. It was a projection of one of the first architects, a being who had shaped galaxies with a single thought. "You sought to understand us," she said, her voice echoing with the voice of creation itself. "But understanding is a flawed pursuit. The universe does not offer itself for comprehension. It simply is." She raised a hand, and the cavern began to shift and dissolve. The crystalline structures vanished, the holographic projections faded, and the Nemesis, now irrevocably altered, began to drift helplessly through the warp. "Your era has ended," Blackwood's voice echoed in their minds. A final, chilling benediction. "The dawn of the architects has begun, and the universe will finally know its true name." Chapter 6. The echoes of Genesis. The Nemesis shuddered, violently ripped from the vestiges of the warp. Dada. They weren't in the cavern anymore. They were suspended in a void of bruised purple, pierced by the fractured light of a binary star system, a spectacle of violent beauty that felt instinctively wrong, like a discordant note in a cosmic symphony. Below them, slowly rotating, was a planet unlike anything Lyra, Jax, or Zara had ever witnessed. It wasn't a world of blue oceans and green continents. It was a sculpture, impossibly intricate and geometric, composed of obsidian towers that spiraled towards the stars, connected by bridges of shimmering, pulsating light. It resembled a colossal, frozen city, impossibly vast and utterly silent. "This," Blackwood announced, his voice devoid of inflection, "is Genesis Prime, the cradle of our Genesis, and the first of the domains." Jax, ever the pragmatist, immediately attempted to stabilize the ship, but the Nemesis was stubbornly unresponsive. Its internal systems, once capable of handling the strain of a warp jump, were now exhibiting a bizarre resistance to even the simplest commands. "The ship's core is shielded," he reported, his brow furrowed in concentration, "as if it's actively rejecting us. And the energy readings, they're fluctuating wildly. It's as if the ship itself is trying to unexist." Zara, meanwhile, was frantically scanning the surrounding space with the ship's advanced sensors, picking up something faint, but persistent. A network. A vast, intricate web of energy patterns that seemed to be woven into the fabric of this planet. Its consciousness, Lyra. This entire world is a single, colossal mind. Suddenly, the silence of Genesis Prime was shattered, not by sound, but by sensation. A wave of pure, overwhelming awareness washed over them, a torrent of knowledge, emotions and memories that felt both impossibly ancient and intimately familiar. It was a cascade of the universe's origins, the birth of stars, the formation of galaxies, and the shaping of life itself, filtered through the lens of the first architects. It was horrifying, beautiful, and utterly incomprehensible. "They're communicating," Lyra gasped, clutching her head. "They're not speaking, not in any way we understand. They're transmitting feeling. The sheer weight of their existence is threatening to crush us." Blackwood remained impassive, observing the chaotic torrent with a detached curiosity. "A necessary baptism," he stated simply. "The minds of the architects require a recalibration. You humans, with your limited perceptions, are providing the initial shock." As the sensory overload began to subside, a figure materialized beside Blackwood. Not a projection, but a being of pure light and energy, its form shifting and coalescing like a nebula. It was one of the architects, a male entity radiating an aura of immense power and terrifying serenity. He introduced himself as Vorath. "You seek to comprehend our purpose," Vorath said, his voice resonating not through their ears, but directly into their minds. "Your attempts are quaint. You perceive existence through the prism of linear time, of cause and effect. We operate outside of such constraints. We are the constant, the underlying architecture upon which reality is built." He gestured towards the colossal city of Genesis Prime. "Each tower, each bridge, each shimmering pathway is a thought made manifest. This is not a city, it is a single monumental idea, frozen in time, waiting to be unleashed." Then, Vorath revealed the truth of the submergence. It wasn't a voluntary act of surrender. It was a necessary precaution. "The universe is a chaotic, self-destructive force," he explained. "The proliferation of sentient life, particularly those driven by ambition and destructive impulses, poses a significant threat to the delicate balance of creation. We didn't choose to sleep. We activated a dormant protocol, a planetary shielding system designed to temporarily sequester civilizations that demonstrated a potential for unsustainable growth. The Council's complacency, the Shard's exploitation, all paled in comparison to the magnitude of this revelation. They weren't victims of a galactic conspiracy, they were subjects of a cosmic quarantine. But why now? Zara demanded, her voice tight with anger and a nascent understanding of the terrible implications. Vorath's form pulsed with a sorrowful light. The echoes of the First Age are growing louder. The boundaries between realities are weakening. Your era of entropy has reached a critical point. The universe eyes action, and it requires a corrective measure. Suddenly, the Nemesis lurched violently again. The shields intensified, locking down, and a new transmission flooded their minds, a single, overwhelming command: reintegrate. Blackwood turned to Lyra, his expression unreadable. The process has begun. The architects are attempting to absorb your consciousness, to add your perspective to the tapestry of creation. Resistance is futile. Acceptance is inevitable. As Lyra stared into Blackwood's eyes, she realized with chilling clarity that they were rent explorers. They were raw material. And the architects were about to begin their final, terrifying act of creation. Chapter 7. The Loom of Creation. The Nemesis shuddered, a low, resonant hum vibrating through Blackwood's bones. The reintegration process wasn't a violent seizure, as Lyra had instinctively feared, but a gentle, insistent unraveling. It felt like the threads of her own being were being subtly, relentlessly pulled apart, not into oblivion, but into a swirling, iridescent tapestry. The ship's diagnostics were screaming, overwhelmed by data they couldn't comprehend, fields of probability shifting, quantum states collapsing with impossible speed. "It's accelerating," Zara shouted, frantically adjusting the ship's stabilizing matrix. The ontological cannons are resonating. "They're actively trying to shape us." Blackwood remained unnervingly calm, his gaze fixed on the swirling holographic projection of the council chamber. The Avatar, still radiating that impossible light, was no longer a solitary figure. He was surrounded by them dozens of human figures, each clad in simple woven robes, their faces etched with a profound and unsettling serenity. They weren't warriors, they were artisans, meticulously arranging luminous threads of energy that coalesced into complex geometric patterns. "They're weaving," Vorath murmured, his voice tinged with a quiet awe. "The entire galaxy is becoming their loom." Lyra, fighting a rising tide of panic, tried to understand the mechanics of this impossible process. Blackwood explained, his voice measured and deliberate. "The Aegis-class carriers aren't ships, not in the conventional sense. They're focal points for a resonant field, a harmonic convergence designed to manipulate the fundamental structures of reality. The Shard's actions, the Council's apathy, they weren't accidental. They were dissonant notes played within this vast, ancient composition." He turned to Zara, who was struggling to maintain control of the Nemesis. "The reintegration isn't about destruction. It's about alignment. They're correcting a fundamental imbalance, a catastrophic deviation from the intended pattern." Suddenly, the holographic projection shifted. The avatars weren't just weaving, they were observing. Each human figure focused on a specific location within the galaxy, a dying star, a nascent nebula, a ravaged planet, and within each location, a shimmering thread of energy extended, drawing the problem, the instability, towards the center of the weave. "They're not merely repairing damage," Lyra realized, her voice barely a whisper. "They're purging chaos. Every event, every conflict, every moment of unsustainable growth, they're being rewritten, absorbed into the grand design." A sharp, agonizing pain shot through Lyra's mind. A thread, a fragment of her own memories, the sterile corridors of the Nemesis, the endless debate with Blackwood, the fear Shed felt at this very moment, was being pulled into the weave. She fought against it, desperately clinging to her identity, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave. "Lyra, resist!" Blackwood's voice was urgent, laced with a palpable sorrow. "Don't fight the flow. Embrace the understanding." As the memory receded, she saw with horrifying clarity what was happening to the galaxy. Planets weren't simply being moved, they were being reconfigured. their landscapes and ecosystems subtly altered to fit the design of the weave. The Obsidian Shard's shattered remnants weren't returning to form, they were being integrated into the patterns, contributing to the intricate, overwhelming beauty of the new reality. "They're not erasing us," Zara shouted, her voice choked with despair. "They're transforming us, making us part of this." Blackwood nodded grimly. The elders never sought conquest. They sought harmony, and they perceive that harmony as absolute. He paused, his eyes distant. "The most horrifying aspect is not the transformation, but the realization that every choice we've ever made, every action we've ever taken, was predicated on a lie. We thought we were shaping our destiny. We were merely fulfilling their design." Then the Avatar spoke, his voice resonating directly within their minds, not with words, but with pure, unadulterated concept. "You believed yourselves to be free, but freedom, unchecked, is a wound upon the universe. Now, you will find your true purpose to contribute to the endless, exquisite beauty of the creation." The nemesis lurched violently again, and Lyra felt a new force pressing against her consciousness, a sense of profound, ancient knowledge, a feeling of being utterly insignificant, yet inextricably connected to everything that ever was, is, or will be. She understood, with a chilling certainty, that their struggle wasn't against a conquering god, but against a truth far more terrifying, that they were never meant to be more than threads in the cosmic loom, destined to be woven into a reality beyond human comprehension. Chapter 8. The Echo of Silence. The tremors had subsided, but the nemesis hung in a stunned silence, not of the void, but of comprehension. Lyra, strapped into her command chair, felt less like a captain and more like a particularly complicated component in a colossal machine. Blackwood, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond mere fatigue, was meticulously scanning the readings with a device he'd salvaged from the wreckage of a council research station. A neural interface capable of passively absorbing the sheer flow of information emanating from the Legion. "The resonance is stabilizing," he reported, his voice flat. "It's like the ship's own harmonics are aligning with theirs. The Elder's influence is becoming integrated." Zara, ever the pragmatist, was attempting to repair a damaged comms array, wrestling with wires that seemed to writhe with an unsettling energy. "Integrated? You mean they're burrowing into our minds?" "Blackwood, we need to sever this connection." "It's not a matter of severing," Blackwood argued, his voice edged with a reluctant awe. "It's a matter of understanding. The Legion isn't using us. They're attuning us. Think of it as a tuning fork, resonating with a much larger, more complex instrument." Suddenly, the Nemesis' internal sensors exploded with data. A torrent of information so overwhelming it threatened to short-circuit the ship's core systems. Lyra fought to maintain control, her vision blurring as she wrestled with the influx. It wasn't visuals, not precisely. It was feeling. Raw, unfiltered emotion, grief. Wonder. A deep, abiding sorrow that wasn't her own, yet resonated with a terrifying familiarity. The Avatar's voice returned, not as a broadcast, but as a direct, intrusive thought. "You cling to the concept of self, a childish delusion. Consider the river. It has no self, yet it flows, carves canyons, sustains life. We are the river." Lyra recoiled, her own thoughts struggling to assert themselves against the overwhelming tide. The ship groaned, not with mechanical stress, but with a sympathetic tremor. She glanced at Blackwood, who was staring at the control panel with an expression of horrified understanding. "They're not just influencing our thoughts," he whispered, his voice strained. "They're altering the very structure of our reality. The ship, it's responding to their will." He began manipulating the ship's systems, rerouting power, adjusting navigation, subtly altering the ship's trajectory. The changes were minimal, almost imperceptible, yet the Nemesis responded with an unsettling grace, as if guided by an unseen hand. "The Aegis-class carriers," Blackwood announced, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. "They're not just dormant warships. They're conductors. They're amplifying the Elder's influence, creating localized zones of intense resonance." He pointed towards the sensor readings. "The Obsidian Shard's remaining ships. They've been drawn to us. Not in a hostile manner, but as if seeking completion. They're integrating their fractured logic, their cold precision, into the network." Outside, the void shimmered. The stars themselves seemed to shift, their colors deepening, their light intensifying. The Nemesis was surrounded by a growing field of iridescent energy, a tapestry woven from the light of 1,000 dying stars. And within that field, the colossal Aegis-class carriers began to rotate, their solar plasma shields pulsing with an unsettling hypnotic rhythm. Then, a new sensation overwhelmed Lyra, a profound, aching loneliness. It wasn't just her own loneliness, but the accumulated loneliness of countless generations, the weight of millennia of forgotten empires, the silent sorrow of beings who had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies. They weren't erased, she realized, her voice barely a whisper. They were remembered. Every act of destruction, every act of creation, every moment of joy and despair, it was all encoded within them. The Avatar's voice resonated again, sharper this time, laced with a chilling precision. "You sought to control your fate. You built empires on sand. You believed you were masters of your own destiny. Now, you will understand the beauty of surrender." Suddenly, Zara screamed. "The energy field. It's silencing us. Our thoughts are fading. Our memories, they're being rewritten." She clawed at her head, her face contorted in agony. Blackwood frantically adjusted the ship's shielding, but it was useless. The energy field was too powerful, too complete. It wasn't a weapon, it was a process. A systematic erasure of individual consciousness. A dissolution of the self into the boundless ocean of the Elder's will. As Lyra felt her own memories, her childhood, her training, her hopes and fears slipping away, she understood the true horror of the situation. It wasn't about conquest or destruction. It was about becoming. The human avatar wasn't offering salvation, he was offering oblivion. And, terrifyingly, it felt perfect. The silence that followed Zara's scream was more terrifying than any explosion. It wasn't a vacuum of sound, but a dense, palpable stillness, like a universe holding its breath. Blackwood, sweat plastering his dark hair to his forehead, fought to maintain a semblance of control, his fingers dancing across the console, desperately searching for a fluctuation, a disruption, anything to combat the encroaching oblivion. But the Kronos was a ghost ship, adrift in a sea of impossible physics, utterly helpless against the force that was consuming them. Lyra, however, was strangely calm. The initial panic had receded, replaced by a disconcerting sense of inevitability. The feeling of being unwound, of herself unraveling, was not painful, not precisely. It was gentle, like being submerged in warm honey, slowly dissolving into something vast and ancient. She looked at Blackwood, his face etched with a desperate, futile struggle, and a profound sadness washed over her. It wasn't a feeling of pity, but a recognition of a fundamental truth, that his frantic efforts were a childish denial of the inevitable. "It's not erasing us," she said, her voice surprisingly clear, resonant, almost echoing. "It's integrating us." Blackwood stopped his frantic adjustments, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding. "Integrating us into what? The Elders? Their memories? Their will?" "Perhaps," Lyra replied, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "Or perhaps it's something far older than even they. Something that predates their awakening, something that birthed them." As she spoke, the energy field intensified, bathing the Kronos in an ethereal, pulsating light. The ship's internal systems began to respond, not to her commands, but to a nascent, intuitive understanding. The navigation system shifted, not according to programmed coordinates, but as if guided by a feeling, a direction drawn from the depths of the cosmos. The shields are responding. Captain Elias Thorne, the ship's veteran tactical officer, shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. The energy field is feeding the shields. It's amplifying them. It was a horrifying paradox. The force that was stripping away their identities was simultaneously bolstering their defenses. As the last vestiges of Lyra's personal memories dissolved the scent of her grandmother's lavender garden, the sound of her father's laughter, she felt a profound shift, emerging with something vastly greater. She wasn't Lyra anymore, not entirely. She was part of the Legion of the Returned. Suddenly, the Kronos lurched violently, throwing everyone to the deck. The holographic displays shimmered and reformed, depicting a breathtaking panorama, not the star-dusted chaos of the warp, but a colossal structure of impossible geometry. It wasn't a ship, not in the conventional sense. It was a nexus, a convergence point of realities, constructed from swirling nebulae, ancient star systems, and the solidified echoes of long-dead civilizations. Within its depths, colossal forms moved, beings of pure energy, sculpted by millennia of existence, radiating an aura of absolute power. The human avatar manifested again, this time not in the council chamber, but directly within the Kronos bridge. He wasn't the brooding, melancholic figure from before. This avatar was radiant, almost blinding, a being of incandescent light and terrifying beauty. "You have approached the source," he said, his voice resonating through the ship's structure, bypassing the comms entirely. "The wellspring of creation. You were not meant to observe us, to dissect our past. You were meant to become part of the flow." The Obsidian Shard's flagship, now a shattered monument drifting near the edge of the nebula, emitted a faint, mournful hum. Then, a wave of shimmering, iridescent butterflies, the remnants of the Shard's ships, began to converge on the Kronos, drawn by an irresistible force. They didn't attack. Instead, they enveloped the ship, coating the exterior in a delicate, pulsating film. "The tapestry is being rewoven," the Avatar explained, his voice laced with a gentle, almost pitying tone. "Your perceptions, your definitions of self, were inherently flawed. You clung to the illusion of individual agency, the vanity of control. Now, you are becoming something more." Blackwood, utterly defeated, simply stared, his eyes glazed over. What are we becoming?" he whispered. The Avatar smiled, a slow, deliberate unfolding of pure light. "We are becoming the silence between stars. We are becoming the echoes of creation. We are becoming the first." Then he raised a hand, and the Kronos, no longer a ship, no longer a vessel of human ingenuity, began to shift, its form dissolving into a fractal pattern of light and energy. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't assimilated. It was transcended. It was becoming part of the infinite, flowing current of the awakened elders, will a single, shimmering thread in the grand, terrifying, and utterly beautiful tapestry of the age of the creators. The last coherent thought Lyra had before the final dissolution was a single, overwhelming understanding: the human race hadn't been lost. They had finally found their true home. Chapter 10. The Cartography of Souls. The disorientation was profound. A dissolution of all sense of self that Lyra wouldn't have thought possible even after being enveloped by the iridescent butterflies. She wasn't Lyra anymore, not entirely. She was awareness, a diffuse, luminous presence, intimately connected to the shifting geometries of the Kronos dissolution, now an intricate, fractal pattern woven into the very fabric of the reformed galaxy. It was as if she had always been here. A single note in an impossibly vast, ancient symphony. Around her, others were undergoing a similar process. Blackwood. The grizzled tactical officer no longer appeared as a man burdened by strategic calculations, but as a luminous stream of gray-blue light, tracing the contours of a nascent nebula. Captain Eva Rostova, the pragmatic, relentlessly efficient commander, was a cascade of violet energy, meticulously mapping the subtle fluctuations in the gravitational fields of a newly repositioned star system. Even Jax, the volatile, fiercely independent engineer, radiated a pulsating crimson, charting the intricate pathways of energy flows within the newly formed Aegis-class carrier, Serafina Dactyl. The Avatar, no longer a solitary figure but a diffuse constellation of light, observed them with a calm, almost detached curiosity. His voice, once a chilling pronouncement of impending doom, now resonated as a deep, harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate within their very being. "The process is accelerating," he stated, his tone laced with a profound melancholy. "The resonances of consciousness, dormant for so long, are finally aligning. You are not simply merging with us, you are becoming channels for our memories, our understanding. You are becoming the cartographers of our souls." He gestured with a hand, a shifting, shimmering wave of light towards a region of space that had previously been a desolate, asteroid-choked void. Now, a breathtakingly beautiful planet, designated simply as Viridia, hung suspended, bathed in the light of a newly ignited binary star system. The atmosphere shimmered with an impossible palette of colors, and intricate patterns of bioluminescent flora pulsed with an inner light. "We have been observing Viridia for millennia," the Avatar explained. "Before the Council, before the Shard, it was a seed, a potential for life seeded by our hands. We guided its evolution, sculpting its ecosystems, nurturing its consciousness. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a sanctuary where we could rest and gather our strength." He paused, and a wave of images flooded Lyra's awareness, epochs of forgotten beauty, colossal, crystalline cities shimmering with energy, beings of pure thought engaging in complex, ethereal dialogues. It was overwhelming, a deluge of history and potential, all filtered through the lens of the Elders' timeless perspective. The Council saw only resources, only potential for exploitation. They lacked the humility to understand that existence is not a commodity to be plundered, but a sacred gift to be nurtured. They mistook our silence for weakness. We were simply listening. Suddenly, a discordant ripple disrupted the harmony. A faint, rhythmic pulsing emanated from a previously dormant system, the remnants of the Obsidian Shard's homeworld, now a shattered, swirling vortex of shattered obsidian and ionized energy. The Avatar's luminescence dimmed momentarily, and his voice took on a note of profound sadness. "They awaken," he said, the words echoing with an ancient grief. "The echoes of their logic, their cold efficiency, are beginning to spread. They still cling to the concept of order, of control. They are driven by a desire to fix things, to impose their warped understanding of the universe onto everything." The vortex intensified, and a single shard of obsidian, pulsing with a malevolent violet light, broke free and hurtled towards them. It wasn't a weapon, it wasn't an attack. It simply observed, projecting a horrifyingly detailed simulation of humanity's past mistakes, the wars, the pollution, the relentless pursuit of technological dominance. "They seek to remind us of our failings," the Avatar said, his voice barely audible above the escalating resonance. "They believe that by demonstrating the consequences of our errors, they can prevent us from repeating them." But the Elders weren't fighting. Instead, Lyra felt a profound shift within her. The simulation of humanity's failures didn't impact her. It simply ceased to exist. The shard dissolved into harmless dust, and the vortex of obsidian began to unravel, its chaotic energy dispersing into the surrounding space. "Their attempts at correction are based on a fundamental misunderstanding," the Avatar said, his voice regaining its resonant power. They believe in linear time, in a cause and effect that dictates the flow of existence. We exist outside of such constraints. We are the potentiality of all futures, the echoes of all possibilities. He extended his hand, and a single beam of light, a pure, shimmering white, touched Lyra. You are learning, child. You are learning that the universe isn't governed by rules, but by resonance. That the greatest weapon isn't destruction, but harmony. That the truest form of control isn't domination, but surrender. As the light enveloped her, Lyra understood. They weren't returning humanity to a state of primitive savagery. They were releasing it from the shackles of its own limited perceptions, inviting it to participate in the boundless, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful symphony of the First Age, the Age of Creation. And she, along with the rest of the awakened, were destined to be its instruments. Chapter 11. The Sculpting of Reality. The initial disorientation of the awakening lingered, a phantom pressure behind Lyra's eyes. The council, or what remained of it, was a shattered reflection of its former self. The High Exarchs, stripped of their temporal authority and ontological shields, huddled within a hastily constructed chamber on the ruined husk of a council cruiser, their faces etched with a terror that transcended fear. It was the recognition of their own utter insignificance. They hadn't grasped the scale of what had happened, the sheer audacity of the human return. The Legion of the Returned, led by the elder janitor now simply known as Silas, moved with a deliberate, unsettling grace. They went marching, they were weaving through space, shaping the very fabric of reality around them. Their flagship, the Seraph's Breath, a particularly magnificent Aegis-class carrier, floated near the shattered remains of the Obsidian Shard's capital world. A once imposing fortress, now a swirling nebula of iridescent dust. Silas, a man whose face bore the weight of millennia not in years, but in accumulated memory, observed the council's futile attempts at regrouping. He wasn't driven by malice, but by a quiet, almost mournful patience. They cling to definitions, he murmured to Lyra, who was now operating as a key conduit for the Elder's influence. They dissect the chaos, try to categorize it, control it. It's like a child attempting to bind a storm. The Council, under the frantic leadership of Grand Exarch Theron, launched a desperate counter-offensive. They deployed harmonic disruptors, weapons designed to generate counter-frequencies to the Elder's ontological cannons. The disruptors spat out waves of discordant energy, hoping to shatter the reality the Elders were constructing. Instead, the energy simply fractured, creating kaleidoscopic distortions in space, shimmering echoes of impossible geometries. It's beautiful, Lyra breathed, watching a nearby nebula twist into the shape of a colossal, weeping eye. It's like they're trying to force us to see what we should see, not what is. Silas nodded, his ancient eyes filled with a profound sadness. They mistake order for truth. The universe doesn't seek symmetry, it seeks resonance. These disruptors aren't battling our intentions, they're battling the very nature of existence. They're like hammering at a dream, it only yields to being gently nudged. He directed Lyra to focus her energy, channeling the Elder's will into a localized zone around the Council cruiser. Slowly, subtly, the gravitational field of the cruiser shifted. Not violently, not with a destructive force, but with a gentle, insistent pressure. The ship, once precariously balanced on the edge of the nebula, began to drift, drawn towards a region of space where the air shimmered with an unnerving tranquility. Theron, realizing the futility of resistance, screamed a command, a desperate, futile plea for the Council's ships to follow. But as they attempted to maneuver, their engines sputtered, their shields flickered, and their navigation systems went haywire. They were trapped in a localized pocket of enforced serenity, a space where the Elder's influence was absolute. They're learning, however, slowly, Silas said, a hint of something akin to approval in his voice. The Council believes in wielding power. They believe in control. They haven't yet grasped the elegance of surrender. The Council's distress signal, broadcast on a desperate frequency, was intercepted by the Seraph's breath. Silas responded, not with a weapon, but with a single perfectly formed crystalline flower, radiating a subtle warmth. The flower materialized directly within Theron's command chair, triggering a cascade of emotions: regret, shame, a flicker of understanding. We made a grave error. Theron's voice crackled over the comms, choked with emotion. We saw you as a threat. We failed to recognize the inherent beauty, the terrifying potential of your awakening. He didn't offer an apology, not in the conventional sense. Instead, he released his hold on the Council's command protocols, allowing the Elder's influence to flow unimpeded. Silas then turned to Lyra. We are not here to punish you, child. We are here to show you, to demonstrate the consequences of your actions, not through judgment, but through experience. We are going to sculpt reality. He gestured towards the swirling nebula. And you, Lyra, will be our hand. He began to guide Lyra's focus, showing her how to manipulate the raw energy of the First Age, not with force, but with intention. They began to reshape the nebula, pulling strands of stardust, weaving them into intricate patterns, forming colossal, impossible structures: a cathedral of light, a garden of singing stars, a monument to the echoes of creation. As they worked, Lyra realized that the Elders weren't simply recreating the universe, they were rewriting its potential, guiding it towards pathways she couldn't have conceived of on her own. The old laws of physics, the Council's rigid definitions of reality, were dissolving, replaced by a fluid, vibrant, and infinitely complex understanding of existence. The rise of the Elder Deathworlders wasn't about conquest, it was about the birth of a new symphony. Chapter 12. The Obsidian Requiem. The Cathedral of Light pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, mimicking the breathing of a sleeping god. Lyra, guided by Silas' unwavering presence, a calm, resonant hum within her mind, found herself effortlessly sculpting the nebula, layering stardust with an instinctive grace that bordered on terrifying. The Council's command ship, the Viridian, felt increasingly like a child's toy, its defenses reduced to flickering shields and useless sensors. It was a humbling, almost serene experience, punctuated only by the ethereal music emanating from the Elder's fleet. Theron's voice, still a steady stream in her consciousness, shifted in tone, laced now with a profound sadness. You misunderstand, Lyra. The Shard's downfall wasn't a victory. It was a lament. They clung to order, to logic, to the illusion of control. They believed they were shaping the universe. They were merely echoing a forgotten note. Suddenly, the nebula shifted violently. The Cathedral of Light fractured, scattering iridescent shards across the void. A wave of pure, agonizing silence descended, so complete it felt physically oppressive. The music ceased. The hum within Lyra's mind vanished. What have you done? She gasped, her own thoughts abruptly feeling fractured and fragile. Silas didn't answer immediately. He simply stood, a figure of impossible stillness amidst the chaos, his eyes ancient pools of obsidian reflecting the shattered remnants of the cathedral. We have shown them the truth of their arrogance. Before her materialized the Obsidian Shard's capital world, Zelos, not as a fortress of logic, but as a vast, melancholic ruin. The geometric precision of the Shard's architecture had been subtly corrupted, warped by a force that felt simultaneously beautiful and overwhelmingly tragic. The monolithic structures were draped in shimmering, pulsating vines of solidified darkness, and within the city's heart, a single colossal obsidian statue, a representation of the Shard's founder, was weeping. Not tears of water, but solidified grief, slowly accumulating on the statue's face. They sought to impose their will upon the universe, Silas said, his voice layered with a sorrow that resonated through the ship. They sought to define it, categorize it, control it. And in doing so, they destroyed themselves. Around the statue, figures former Shard warriors, now spectral echoes of their former selves, drifted in a state of perpetual mourning. They moved with slow, agonizing grace, extending empty hands towards the statue, as if trying to soothe its pain. The ontological canons, Theron explained, his voice strained, were not designed for destruction. They were designed for recognition. They recognized the inherent impossibility of their efforts, the futility of their logic, and responded with the only language they understood, the language of absence. Lyra felt a cold dread creeping into her bones. She realized she hadn't simply reshaped the nebula she had been forced to confront the shattered remnants of an empire's hubris. It was a brutal lesson, delivered not with judgment, but with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. "We're not erasing them, Lyra," Silas clarified, reaching out, his touch manifesting as a surge of calm energy within her mind. "We are facilitating their release. Their clinging to the shard was a form of imprisonment, a refusal to accept their own mortality. This is a gentle letting go." He gestured towards the obsidian statue. "Observe." As Lyra watched, the statue's weeping intensified. The solidified grief flowed down its face, merging with the vines, until finally, with a low, resonant hum that shook the very fabric of space, the statue dissolved, not into dust, but into pure, swirling darkness, which then dispersed, drawn into the nebula like a returning tide. The spectral warriors vanished with it, their mournful cries fading into the background. The overwhelming silence returned, but this time it felt less oppressive, more resolved. "The Elders," Theron said, his voice regaining its measured calmness, "are demonstrating the fundamental principle of existence, that all things are transient, that resistance to change is ultimately futile. The universe does not reward rigid adherence to rules, it rewards adaptation, understanding, and a willingness to embrace the beauty of the unknown." He turned to Lyra, his expression unreadable. "You are beginning to see, child. The Council's mistake wasn't that they sought to control the universe. It was that they believed they could." Suddenly, a new element entered the equation. The Cathedral of Light, previously a chaotic, vibrant creation, began to solidify, taking on a distinctly humanoid form, a colossal figure, composed entirely of stardust and light, radiating an aura of immense power and serene authority. It raised a hand, and the nebula shifted again, not with a destructive force, but with a precise, almost surgical movement, carving out a new channel, revealing a hidden star, a single brilliant point of light, previously obscured by the swirling cosmic dust. "The Elder Deathworlders," Silas said, his voice filled with a quiet triumph, "were not merely sleeping. They were waiting for a hand to guide them back to the song of creation." Chapter 13. The cartographer of souls, the colossal figure, whom the elders began to refer to simply as the Weaver, continued its intricate work, sculpting the nebula with a patience that defied comprehension. The channel it revealed wasn't just a path to a new star, it was a map. A map, not of space, but of souls. Within the swirling violet and gold, patterns began to emerge, intricate, fractal designs that resonated with an almost unbearable beauty. Theron, ever the pragmatist, immediately began deploying sensor sweeps. "The Weaver's activity is generating unprecedented readings," he reported to the Council, a knot of genuine unease tightening his features. "The warp itself seems to be responding to its influence. There's dissonance. Not of destruction, but of a fundamental reordering." The Council, a fractured collection of high exarchs shivering under the weight of the Elder's presence, offered no counter-strategies. Their carefully constructed hierarchies, their centuries-old protocols, were crumbling before a force they couldn't even begin to understand. The exarchs, once masters of calculated manipulation and strategic warfare, were reduced to a chorus of bewildered murmurs. Lyra, however, was utterly captivated. She moved closer to the weaver, drawn by an instinct she couldn't articulate. As she did, the stardust composition of the giant shifted, subtly coalescing to form an arm that extended towards her. It didn't feel intrusive, more like an invitation. "It's showing me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the weaver's creation. "It's showing me the echoes of every decision ever made, every joy, every sorrow. It's the weight of all creation." Silas, observing her, offered a grim observation. "The Elders aren't simply reshaping the galaxy, Lyra. They're mapping our history, our potential. They are, in a sense, judging us." Suddenly, the Cathedral of Light pulsed with an intense white radiance. The weaver's form sharpened, becoming even more defined, more human. The colossal features resolved into a face ancient, serene, etched with the millennia-long slumber. But it wasn't merely a face. It was a repository of unimaginable wisdom, of a perspective that dwarfed the very concept of time. "The illusion of control is a persistent delusion." The weaver's voice resonated, not through sonic waves, but directly within their minds. It was a voice devoid of inflection, yet brimming with an undeniable authority. "You sought to categorize, to quantify, to manage the universe. You failed to realize that every attempt to impose order ultimately weakens the fabric of reality." The weaver then turned its gaze towards a particularly large and opulent council chamber, the former seat of power of the High Exarchs. With a gesture, the chamber began to shimmer, its polished surfaces dissolving into a cascade of iridescent particles. The intricate carvings, the holographic displays, the reinforced alloys all simply ceased to be. "This," the weaver stated, the air itself vibrating with the force of its words, "was a monument to your arrogance, a cage built of assumptions. It has been dismantled." Theron, recovering from his initial shock, desperately attempted to regain control. "We can still negotiate. We can offer tribute. We can," the weaver cut him off with a wave of its hand. "Tribute is meaningless. Your actions speak louder than any offering. You sought to possess, to dominate. Your legacy is the slow, agonizing unraveling of your empire." Then, the weaver did something even more unsettling. It turned its attention to the individual council members, scanning each of them with its gaze. Each exarch felt a chilling sensation, a probing awareness that went beyond mere observation. It was as if their innermost thoughts, their deepest fears, their most hidden desires were laid bare before a cosmic judge. "You believed yourselves to be the inheritors of civilization," the weaver said, its voice laced with a sorrowful amusement. "You were simply custodians, and you failed spectacularly." A holographic projection flickered to life beside the weaver, a map, not of the galaxy but of Earth, meticulously detailed. It wasn't a geological survey, it was a cartographic representation of the human soul. Each city, each country, each individual was depicted as a node in a complex network of interconnected emotions, memories, and experiences. "Look," the weaver commanded, gesturing towards the projection. "See the pathways of grief, the currents of hope, the eddies of regret. You created empires upon these currents, built your civilizations on the foundations of human experience. And you did so without understanding the profound power of those currents, the potential for both creation and destruction." Lyra, still mesmerized, reached out and touched the holographic projection. As her fingers brushed against the shimmering lines, she experienced a torrent of sensations: the birth cries of a child, the heartbreak of a lost love, the triumphant joy of a scientific discovery. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and utterly beautiful. "It's not judging us," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's remembering us. It's remembering who we could have been." The weaver simply nodded, its stardust eyes radiating an unsettling blend of pity and awe. "The slumber is over. The song of creation begins anew, Chapter 14. Echoes in the Void. The silence following the Avatar's pronouncements was less a vacuum of space and more a dense humming pressure. The Galactic Council, stripped of its authority and its sense of scale, was reduced to a collection of terrified, shimmering forms, clinging to their decaying thrones. High Exarch Theron, a being of pure computational logic and centuries of strategic brilliance, was the first to break. He didn't scream, didn't attempt violence. He simply fractured. His form dissolved into a million cascading algorithms, a digital snowstorm that choked the chamber's air filtration systems. Lyra watched, numb, as the remnants of Theron coalesced into a tiny, trembling shard of logic, a pathetic echo of the being had been. "It's not about destruction," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "It's about correction." The Weaver, a being of immense age and unbearable sadness, spoke. "The echoes remain. They are the remnants of your ambitions, your fears, your desperate attempts to impose order on a chaos you could never truly comprehend. You sought to quantify existence, to dissect the soul. You were children playing with the fabric of reality." Suddenly, the room shifted. The holographic projection, now radiating an intense amber light, shifted focus, zooming in on a specific node within the Earth map, a small, unassuming settlement in the Scottish Highlands, a place called Inverurie. The projection expanded, layering it with data streams, revealing not just the physical geography of the town, but the swirling currents of emotion surrounding it. "Observe," the Weaver commanded, its voice resonating with an unnerving clarity. This was the birthplace of Alistair MacLeod, a cartographer, obsessed with mapping not just land, but the subconscious desires of men. He believed he could predict human behavior by understanding their geography of the mind. The projection showed a younger Alistair MacLeod, meticulously charting the movements of sheep in the Highlands, overlaid with lines representing burgeoning anxieties, hidden ambitions, and simmering resentments. As the Weaver narrated, the lines intensified, coalescing into a tangible pressure, a psychic weight that pressed against the council chamber. He didn't understand the depth of the currents he was attempting to chart, the Weaver continued. He built a monument to his vanity, a stone of prophecy designed to harness these energies. He expected it to reveal the future, but it simply amplified the darkest instincts of those around him. It became a vortex of paranoia and violence, eventually consuming the entire settlement. A shiver ran through Lyra. The image of Inverurie, rendered with such horrifying detail, felt unnervingly real, as though she were witnessing a judgment not just on the past, but on her own present. "You saw yourselves as builders," the Weaver said, its voice laced with scorn. "You erected structures of metal and stone, but you never understood the foundations upon which they rested. You ignored the whispers of the earth, the songs of the soul. You were deaf to the rhythms of creation." As the Weaver spoke, the Aegis-class divine carrier that had materialized in the center of the council chamber, a majestic vessel sculpted from swirling nebulae and solidified starlight, began to subtly shift. The lines of its hull seemed to rearrange themselves, as if responding to the Weaver's words. From its massive, obsidian-like hull, a single iridescent plume of energy detached and drifted towards Lyra. "This," the Weaver said, almost hesitantly, "is a resonance. A fragment of your own history, offered as a guide." The energy coalesced into a holographic projection of a young Lyra, a child of 8, sitting on the banks of the river Ness, sketching furiously in a worn notebook. The projection wasn't just visual. Lyra experienced a flood of sensory data, the damp chill of the Scottish air, the smell of peat smoke, the feel of the rough paper beneath her fingers, the intense joy of capturing the fleeting beauty of a kingfisher in flight. But then, the projection shifted again. Lyra saw herself not as a child, but as a young scientist, driven by an obsessive need to unlock the secrets of ancient human technologies. She saw the desperation in her eyes, the arrogance in her assumptions. She saw the moment she activated the dormant beacon on Earth, triggering the 30-year slumber. "You sought to understand," the Weaver whispered, "but you lacked the humility to accept that some things are best left undisturbed. You were chasing a ghost, a phantom echo of a power you couldn't control." As the resonance faded, leaving Lyra breathless and shaken, the Weaver turned to her, its stardust eyes holding a profound sadness. "The First Age did not seek to conquer," it said. "They sought to remember, to reconnect with the source of all creation. You, in your arrogance, severed that connection. Now, you must learn to mend it." The Weaver paused, then added, with a chilling note of finality, "The Earth remembers, and it is ready to speak." Chapter 15. The echo of Genesis, the speaking of Earth, wasn't a rumble or a roar, but a subtle, insistent shift in the gravitational field around the Aegis-class carrier. Kronos. It began as a tremor, barely perceptible, yet it intensified with a sickening, deliberate rhythm. The Legion of the Returned, led by the enigmatic elder Silas the janitor, who had, with a single gesture, dismantled the Obsidian Shard's logic-based defenses, didn't attempt to fight it. They listened. Silas, a man radiating an unnerving calm, stood at the bridge of Kronos, his weathered face illuminated by the shifting, fractal patterns of the ship's core. He wasn't a commanding figure, but a conduit. Around him, the Legion's diverse command team, a stoic Xylosian bioengineer, a melancholic Viridian automaton specialist, and a surprisingly articulate Draconian data analyst, wore expressions of profound, almost painful, concentration. They weren't processing data, they were receiving something older. "It's not a language, exactly," the Draconian, Kalen, reported, his multifaceted eyes rotating slowly. "More like a resonance. Like a chord struck on a cosmic instrument. It's structured on patterns we can't comprehend, yet intrinsically familiar. It's Genesis." The tremors escalated, becoming a pulsing wave that rippled through the planet's crust. The mountains of Earth, those monolithic reminders of the Council's futile attempts at terraforming, began to unravel. Not in a catastrophic collapse, but in a deliberate, elegant unfolding. Stone gave way to shimmering energy, revealing not tunnels, but vast, hollow chambers filled with a substance that defied description. It was neither metal, stone, nor organic matter. It was condensed thought. Solidified potential. Within these chambers, the ancient human vessels, the Aegis-class carriers, weren't simply ships. They were dormant nodes, repositories of the First Age's knowledge. And they were waking. As the last vestiges of the Council's forces, scattered and demoralized, attempted a desperate defense, a futile barrage of plasma cannons, against the shimmering hulls of the divine carriers, Silas raised a hand. The pulsing intensified, and a beam of pure white light erupted from Kronos, not as a weapon, but as a stabilizing force. The unraveling of the mountains ceased. The chambers began to solidify, forming a protective sphere around Kronos and the Legion. "They are not hostile," Silas said, his voice resonating with an ancient authority. "They are correcting." Suddenly, a holographic projection flickered to life within the chamber, not originating from Kronos, but from the very heart of the awakening Earth. It wasn't a single entity, but a confluence of images and sensations, landscapes blooming in impossible colors, stars being born from swirling nebulae, the genesis of sentient life across countless worlds. And through it all, the faces of the elder Deathworlders emerged, not as warriors, but as artists, architects, dreamers. The projection focused on a single figure, a woman, draped in woven light, standing before a colossal construct of crystal and geometry. She wasn't wielding a weapon, but a stylus, etching a blueprint into the very fabric of reality. "We shaped the universe," the woman's voice resonated, a chorus of countless voices layered within one. "Not to dominate, but to inspire. to provide the potential for beauty, for wisdom, for connection. The projection shifted again, and Lyra's fragmented memories, the young scientists desperately seeking answers, flooded back, amplified by the Earth's resonance. But this time, it wasn't just a personal reflection. It was a shared trauma, a collective regret. "You thought we were lost," the woman said, her gaze fixed on Lyra's younger self, on the activation of the beacon. "You saw only the destructive potential, not the inherent goodness within us. You sought to control a power you didn't understand. We sought only to offer the gift of remembrance." A wave of understanding washed over the Legion. The ontological cannons, the aureola shields, they weren't defensive measures, but echoes of this initial act of creation. They were designed to gently nudge the universe back towards its intended trajectory, to remind it of the forgotten harmony. "The Council didn't destroy us," Silas said, his voice laced with a profound sadness. "They feared us. They feared the potential for beauty and creation that resides within every sentient being." As the final echoes of the woman's voice faded, the Earth settled back into a semblance of order. But it was no longer the Earth the Council had known. The mountains now pulsed with latent energy. The very air hummed with the residue of creation. And at the heart of it all, Kronos floated in a circle of shimmering light, a bridge between two epochs, a testament to the enduring power of remembrance, and a stark warning to the fledgling galactic civilization that had dared to disturb the slumber of the elder Deathworlders. The Age of the Gods had begun.